So what are we seeing here? It has been a summer of strikes. We're not done even as we go into the autumn. But how much of this do you think is because of a basic shift in power toward labor? How much of it is new technology on the horizon?
Well, first of all, it's great to be back here with you. I think it's a bit of both. I think there is definitely a sense that, labor is in a stronger position than it has been for much of the past few decades. Unemployment is very low, the economy is very strong, there's a shortage of labor, the labor market has changed after the pandemic, and so there's a sense that labor is in a stronger position. But I think part of the motivation is also a concern about what the next wave of technology means, whether it's, with the UAW, whether it's EVs and the shift in the nature of car manufacturing, whether it's AI, all these technologies are on the horizon, and there's a sense of concern about that change and a kind of grabbing of the gains while you can, and perhaps also, as so often, unfortunately, with unions, there's a bit of a sense of let's stop history, I want to get off, and that's the worrying bit.
So turn to the technology, and it's not just the unions that may stay in the way. We've seen some corporations over the years who said, we just don't want the new technology to come. As you say, it almost never works that I'm aware of. At the same time, you could understand why labor is saying, wait a second, you talked to us when we really liberalized trade and we went toward globalization. We lost out, particularly manufacturing jobs in the United States of America. Is there anything that can be done by corporations, by the government, to try to avoid the problem that we had last time?
Absolutely there is, but first I think it's understanding what is going on right now. And you're right that in the past few decades, two things were happening. There was a bunch of technological change and there was globalization, there was competition from abroad. And what we're seeing now in the kind of backlash against globalization in the US, and we're seeing it in both parties, is a much greater focus on protectionism. And if you look at Bidenomics, if you will, one of the problems with the president's policy is that they're conflating a whole bunch of things. There's a lot of subsidies to accelerate the green transition, to accelerate the shift to electrification. At the same time, there's quite a lot of protectionism in there, which is, of course, works at odds with the attempt to accelerate that transition. So what I think is important is to separate this out. I'm a free trader at heart, always have been. That's what we've fought for 180 years. I don't think protectionism and tariffs is a sensible medium or indeed long-term strategy for helping US workers. I think the goal needs to be how to prepare workers to enable them to take advantage of new technologies. And so that's easily said. And, it's easy to say, well, yeah, you need to retrain. But you do need to work out what are the skills that people will need to thrive in the new economy. And kind of stopping technology from being adopted is a very short-sighted solution. So I think that the challenge now, and we didn't get it right in the 90s and the 2000s. We definitely didn't do enough to equip workers for new technologies, to think about from the education system to the training system to the kind of adoption in the factory, what is it that needs to be done to ensure that we have the workforce that's needed. And to put this in very concretely the context right now, if you look at the ambitions of the IRA, the ambitions of for the electrification of this country, there are a huge number of jobs that are going to be created, whether it's in building the factories, whether it's then in actually manning the factories. And at the moment, the concerns are, where will those people come from? And so rather than trying to stop that shift, I think the challenge for both unions and for companies is, how do we ensure that we've got the right workers with the right skills that we will need, so that we aren't slowed in that transition by not having the right kind of people.
So come back to something you talked about, and that is President Biden's plan, the Inflation Reduction Act. They're moving toward so-called green. He is caught a little bit between two stools here. On the one hand, he wants to go to electric vehicles really fast. On the other hand, people tell us they probably will need something like 40% fewer workers. Is that a zero-sum game? Is there a way to have both workers getting good wages, having good jobs, and move to electric vehicles?
The obvious answer is yes, of course, because there will be demand for workers. They may just be doing different jobs. They may even be in different industries. But I think when you put your finger on a challenge that President Biden has, because he has wrapped his push to green vehicles and his green transition in the Inflation Reduction Act in a kind of context of, this is good for the American worker, and not just it's good for the American worker, it's good for the union worker and good for union jobs. And so that's where he's caught in a bit of a bind, because he's trying to say that one policy is great for today's union jobs and is going to accelerate the green transition. And there really is a bit of a trade-off there. I think the importance of accelerating the green transition means there will be good jobs in the future. The US will be greener, cleaner, and will be a stronger 21st century economy. But it doesn't mean that the exact jobs that we have today will still be the jobs that are there tomorrow.
Let's finish on artificial intelligence, because we've been talking largely about manufacturing with automobiles and the workers who are on the line in manufacturing. Artificial intelligence at least has the potential to disrupt a very different part of the labor force. People who are much more trained, a lot of people who are college educated, and could really lose their jobs because it's being done by generative AI. How do we address that problem? Because you may have a different segment of society that is dislocated in the next 10 years.
Absolutely. And the answer, I think the answer is that we don't know quite how big that group will be or exactly where it will be. Potentially, I think AI will disrupt huge swaths of the economy. It will probably take longer than many people right now in the midst of the hype believe, because quite often if you look at technologies, they take a little longer to integrate than people think, but then they have a much more fundamental impact. So I don't know exactly which industries the impact will be biggest, fastest, but it clearly will be there. I think the answer is, and I sound a bit like a broken record, but the answer is the same one, which is not to try and stop the adoption of the technology, because that yields the productivity improvements, which yield the economic growth, which yield the resources, which enable you then to invest in and create new jobs. But it is to equip people with the means and the skills for the new kind of jobs. And I actually think that AI, interestingly, is likely to be a big enhancer for many jobs. It's going to be labor augmenting, to use the jargon, rather than necessarily just labor substituting. And what we honestly don't know is the answer. But trying to stop the technology is clearly not the answer. The answer is, when you're in, whether you're a worker themselves, whether you're preparing to join the workforce, whether you're in a company, adopting the technology, figuring out how to enhance the skills that your workers need and to change the jobs. Back in the day, people worried that the ATM machine was going to mean the end of, bank teller jobs. Well, actually, there are more jobs in banking now than there have been for, ever before. So I'm a paid-up economist who doesn't believe in the lump of labor fallacy. I don't think there's a set number of jobs. I think there'll be all kinds of jobs that AI will create that we don't even know about, like, prompt engineer is a new job category. There's already lots of prompt engineers. There's going to be many more prompt engineers. So we can have this debate, and maybe when we get to a world where, super AI is better at everything than humans, we will all be displaced by computers and AIs. I don't see that coming. I think for the moment, everything that I've seen, and we've been working quite a lot on AI, I think is going to be a huge tool.